The lobby froze the moment Sergeant Kane slapped Naomi Carter across the face. No warning, no reason, just raw hatred. A black woman humiliated in front of dozens of officers, her dignity trampled, as laughter echoed around her. But Naomi didn't flinch. Instead, she looked him in the eye and revealed the truth: she was their new chief. Now the question is, how does a leader rise from such injustice to confront the very system that tried to break her? If this outrages you, hit like and share this story, because what follows will shake you even more. I was standing 10 feet from the front desk when it happened. No warning, no build-up, just a crack that sliced through the lobby like a rifle shot. Sergeant Brody Kane's hand came across Naomi Carter's face so hard, the sound bounced off the tiles and died somewhere near the elevators. Conversation stalled mid-sentence. Phones froze halfway to ears. The place went still in that eerie way a room does when everyone realizes they just crossed a line they can't uncross. Kane's mouth kept moving, ugly words spilling out, the kind people use when they want to shrink you down to nothing. He was red-faced, chin-jutted, posture wide, like he owned the floor under our feet. A couple of officers by the water cooler snorted mean, nervous little laughs. Others looked sick, like they'd swallowed something sharp. I felt my own stomach knot. It wasn't just the slap, it was how easy it looked for him, like habit. Naomi didn't touch her cheek. The skin there was already flushing dark, a bright, hot bloom rising under the harsh lights. She didn't blink away tears or reach for a chair. She just stood, still, breathing once steady. Her right hand slipped into the pocket of her blazer, and it stayed there, knuckles tightening around something small. I caught a flash of brass when her thumb turned a dull coin, not shiny, the kind you earn and keep. I'd seen one before, a service coin. The way her fingers closed around it told me this wasn't the first time she'd had to hold herself together in a room full of men who wanted her to fold. "Out," Kane barked. "You don't belong here." He said it loud enough to be heard upstairs, loud enough to make it true if no one challenged him. His voice rattled the framed commendations on the wall. Somewhere behind me, a printer hummed and then fell quiet. Naomi's face was calm, but it wasn't the kind of calm you put on for show. It was the calm you sharpen over years, when the best move is to let the other person think they're steering right up until they aren't. "Sir," someone started near the door. Kane didn't turn. He was locked on Naomi like a dog with a bone. She finally moved, just her eyes at first lifting to meet his. If you've ever watched a fuse burn slow and certain, that's what it felt like. Not a flinch, not a retreat. A decision. "I need to see the mayor," she said, voice even not a tremor in it. Kane laughed. It was a hard, barking thing that made a couple of guys by records chuckle along before they knew why. "The mayor doesn't meet with trash," he sneered. "Walk out or get dragged out." I don't know what I expected. Maybe a plea a step back, something to diffuse it. What I got was a pivot I'll remember as long as I live. Naomi lifted her chin. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Sergeant," she said, shaping the word as if it were a reminder, not a title you should know who you're talking to. Kane smirked. "Yeah, and who's that?" She took her hand out of her pocket. The coin disappeared back into the lining like a secret. She squared her shoulders until she wasn't smaller or larger, just centered. "I'm your new police chief." It hit the room like pressure dropping before a storm. The dirty laughs went quiet first, then the little gasps. One officer muttered, "Oh no," under his breath, like a prayer he'd learned too late. A young guy near the copier actually took a step back and bumped into a chair. I watched Kane's eyes flick just a flash to the stairwell, then to the camera above the desk. For half a second, his face emptied. It was the look of a man who realized the world just shifted, and he was the last to feel the ground move. He covered it fast. Big men learn to fill silence. Kane barked another laugh, bigger this time, performance-sized. "Sure you are," he said, reaching for a sheet of paper on the counter, the appointment letter she'd placed there like a flag. He snatched it up, barely looked at the seal, and ripped it straight down the middle. Nice forgery. Paper fell in soft pieces, a cheap snow. Somebody swore. Somebody else whispered, "What is he doing?" Naomi didn't grab for the scraps, didn't scold him. She just watched them drift to the floor and said, with the kind of calm you only get when the facts are already on your side, "That was an official document." Kane opened his mouth, but the room answered for him. Boots thudded on the stairs. Heads turned. The mayor's detail moved first, clearing a path without touching anyone, And then Mayor Whitmore appeared on the landing, silver hair-tight jaw, the kind of presence that silences a choir. He took one look at Naomi, at the handprint on her cheek, at the shredded paper under Kane's boots, and his voice went winter cold. "Officers," he said, "meet Chief Naomi Carter. If shame had a sound, it's what rolled through that lobby." Bad laughs dying in throats, belts creaking as men stood a little straighter, a cough that didn't know where to go. My own breath felt loud. Kane tried to stand taller too. It didn't work. The badge on his chest suddenly looked heavy. He glanced up again, and that's when I noticed the red light on the ceiling camera. It blinked steady, unblinking in its own way. Recording the slap, the insults, the rip, the denial, every choice captured. Naomi didn't smile. She didn't milk the moment. She said "Mayor" with a respectful nod, then looked back at the room, and this matters, at the officers who hadn't laughed, the ones who looked sick. She made a small adjustment to her jacket sleeve, almost like she was rolling up to go to work, and for the first time I realized that was exactly what this was. Not a scene, a beginning. Kane found his voice again, louder than before, too loud. "This is a setup," he said. "She's lying. That paper was fake." No one moved to back him up. Naomi's cheek was still red. She didn't hide it. She didn't explain it away. She let it speak. She set her palm flat on the counter where the letter had been and said, "We're done with shouting. We're going to do this by the book." His eyes cut to the mayor, then to the corners where every hallway met the lobby like a funnel. You could feel the calculations clattering behind his stare. Power is a habit, so is impunity. Both were slipping. Someone near me whispered, "He's cooked." I felt the hair on my arms rise. Not from fear exactly, from the sense that a wheel had started turning and wasn't going to stop for anyone who didn't climb on. Naomi didn't gloat. She stood in the center of the mess he'd made and refused to budge. The only thing in the lobby that kept moving was that little red light above us, blink, 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 steady, as a metronome counting down to the next beat. Kane's fingers tore the appointment letter in one violent motion. The Golden City seal split down the middle as if he could rip authority itself in half. The scraps fluttered to the floor like confetti at a funeral. "Fake," he spat. "You're nothing but a liar." For a heartbeat, the lobby hung in silence. Then the click of leather soles on marble echoed from the stairwell. Heads turned as Mayor Daniel Whitmore appeared at the landing. Silver hair gleaming under the lights, two councilmen shadowing him. His eyes swept the room sharp as a gavel striking. "Good afternoon," the mayor said, his voice carrying the weight of office. His gaze fixed on Naomi. "Chief Carter." "I see introductions have already been made." The word chief dropped into the room like a stone into still water. Ripples spread fast. One by one, officers shifted. A few scrambled to straighten their uniforms. Others looked at their boots, cheeks burning with shame. I saw one man whisper to himself, "God help us." The regret was written all over their faces. Regret for laughing, regret for staying quiet, regret for letting Kane lead the charge. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't even dust the torn papers from her jacket. She simply inclined her head to the mayor. "Thank you, sir," she said, her tone steady. Then turning back to the room, she added, "This welcome tells me exactly what kind of department I'm inheriting." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They rolled through the lobby like a quiet storm, more devastating than shouting could ever be. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed Officer Lena Cho by the water cooler. She couldn't have been more than 25, her black hair tied in a tight knot, hands clutching her phone like a lifeline. Her expression was a knot of fear and something else, hope maybe. Her eyes flicked between Naomi and Kane as if she were watching the first crack split open in a wall she'd lived behind her whole career. Kane tried to regain ground. He puffed up, squared his shoulders, but the sweat already glistened on his temple. "This is insane," he barked. "You can't just walk in here and enough." The mayor snapped, his tone freezing the air. "Sergeant, you'll watch your tongue. Chief Carter is your commanding officer now." Kane's jaw worked, but no sound came. His face reddened, but this time not from rage. The mask was slipping. Naomi's gaze drifted to Kane's desk. An open duty roster lay there, pages curled from use. She stepped closer, her eyes skimming the lines. Something about the schedule caught her attention. Whole blocks of empty shifts. Officers assigned in overlapping times. Names repeated where they didn't belong. It wasn't obvious to everyone, but it was enough to make her brow crease. She didn't say anything yet, but her silence was heavy, intentional. I saw her fingertips linger on the edge of the paper, as though planting a flag no one else had noticed. A seed was sown in that moment, a suspicion that this wasn't just arrogance or prejudice. It was rot deeper than the slap, deeper than the insult. The mayor moved beside her, his presence making the weight of the moment inescapable. "Chief Carter," he said formally, his eyes flicking at the assembled officers. "I apologize for this reception." Naomi finally let herself move. She brushed the shredded paper from her sleeve and offered the faintest, coldest smile. "No apology necessary," she replied. "This has been educational." A murmur ran through the lobby like dry leaves in wind. Officers exchanged looks, uneasy and restless. Some shifted their weight like men caught in a lie they hadn't meant to tell. Others stood stiff, eyes locked on Naomi, as if trying to figure out whether she was a threat or salvation. Kane remained rooted, face twisted between defiance and fear. But the truth was clear: his mask had cracked, and everyone in that lobby had seen it. And Naomi, she didn't raise her voice, didn't grandstand, didn't revel in the moment. She simply let the silence work for her. The silence and the knowledge that every red blink of the camera above was recording all of it. The mayor was still on the landing when Naomi turned to the room and said, clear as a bell, "No one leaves this building. For the next 48 hours, every file, every camera, every minute of tape gets reviewed." You could feel the word 48 settle on shoulders like weight. A couple of officers looked toward the doors as if they might grow wings. They didn't. The mayor came down the last steps, took a pen from his aide, and signed a single page on the front desk. He didn't raise his voice, but it carried. "I'll answer to the city," he said. "Chief Carter will answer for this department." Pens stopped scratching. Radios quieted. Even the HVA seemed to hush. Kane stood rigid, jaw grinding, but he didn't say a thing. The red light on the ceiling camera blinked patient as a clock. Naomi didn't grandstand. She pointed once and motion flowed. "Sergeant Rivera, secure the exits." "Lieutenant Shaw, notify night shift they're staying." "Internal tech to the lobby." "Records bring me 6 months of duty rosters." Orders clipped, measured, unhurried. People snapped to it before they realized they'd agreed. I followed the current down the corridor as the crowd regrouped in the briefing room, a long rectangle with a projector screen that always seemed too big until you needed it. Tonight it looked just right. Eli Vance, our IT guy, slid in with 2 laptops and a coil of cables slung like a bandolier. He was pale but steady, the kind of steady that gets stronger when the work starts. Naomi took the first row, not the podium. She didn't need height. She had attention. "Mr. Vance," she said, "start with the past week." The lights dimmed with a click. The projector hummed alive, throwing blue onto the wall, then grain resolving to color. Monday. The lobby again from a higher angle. Mrs. Chen, tiny, wiry, a crate of oranges at her feet, stood at the desk. You could see her mouth form polite words. You could see Kane's shoulders swell as he stepped in. No audio, not on this camera, but you didn't need sound to read the moment: the shove, the stagger, the oranges rolling in bright, helpless circles while she reached for the counter and missed. Someone in the room swore softly. Someone else made a small, wounded sound and tried to swallow it. Eli tapped a key. Tuesday. A teenage boy, backpack, long limbs, bravado, that wasn't fooling anyone, asked a question with his palms up, pleading. Kane grabbed the strap, spun him, slammed him chest first into the wall. The boy's face pressed flat against the cinder block. His eyes were open and stunned. The room breathed in and didn't breathe out for 3 counts. Another tap. Wednesday. Mr. Martinez, in his work jacket hands, raised an apology for existing in the wrong place, at the wrong time. Kane leaned in close, his finger jabbing a finite point in the air inches from the man's nose. Demeaning, dwarfing, you could almost feel the spit. Martinez flinched like a man used to slipping past storms and realizing this one wanted him. No one spoke. We didn't need narration. The footage did what truth always does when you finally stop arguing with it. It had the floor. Across from me, a young officer with freckles covered her mouth, eyes going glassy. The older detective beside her stared straight ahead, like a man at his own funeral. Another officer, one of Kane's barstool buddies, shifted, then shifted again like the chair had suddenly grown spikes. Shame does that. It finds the pressure points. Eli kept going. Different angles, different days, the same pattern. The lobby camera, the intake hallway, the side door by the permits office. The details changed. The math didn't. Blackface's bent shoulders. Kane's posture getting bigger when theirs got smaller. A week edited itself into a verdict. Naomi didn't midwife the outrage. She let it arrive. When the fifth clip ended, she lifted a hand. The room held still like a photograph. "Freeze it there," she told Eli. On the screen, a single frame Kane's hand on Mr. Martinez's chest, two fingers spread, not a push, yet the threat of one. Mrs. Chen in the background crouched to gather fallen fruit she'd never caused to fall. The boy's backpack on a bench waiting to be returned to a back that hurt. Naomi stood. She didn't climb to the podium. She turned to face us, the projection washing a cold light over her cheek, where Kane's slap had bloomed. "Is that the law you swore to uphold?" she asked. Not a yell, not a sermon. A question placed where a man can't dodge it. No one answered. She took a breath, slow and even, and let it out. "We can't fix what we won't face. So we're going to face it. All of it." She nodded to the mayor. He gave a brisk 2-inch dip of his chin, permission and partnership, nothing more, nothing less. It made the room feel fenced in and oddly safer. Whatever came next wasn't going to vanish into rumor. It would stand on paper and on tape. Mr. Vance, Naomi said, mark each clip for evidence. Make duplicates. One goes to the city's legal counsel, one to an off-site secure server. Chain of custody starts now. Eli's fingers moved like he'd been waiting years to be told exactly that. Around the edges, small things happen. A veteran took off his cap and twisted it in both hands. A patrolman slid his phone back into his pocket, embarrassed to be holding anything that wasn't the moment. A lieutenant with silver at his temples leaned forward as if he could get between the past and the wall and keep them from touching. Kane finally spoke, a rasp more than a voice. "This is out of context." Eli paused the footage. The frozen frame didn't. Naomi didn't look at Kane when she replied. "Context is coming," she said. "All of it." She turned to records. "Duty rosters," she said. 6 months. Printed and digital. To internal tech audit access logs on lockers and evidence rooms. To the floor at large, if you have something to say, there will be time to say it. Under oath. That last line landed like the click of a seatbelt before a steep drop. The projector cycled back to a blue screen. The lights rose just enough to make faces visible without offering anyone a place to hide. Naomi scanned the room, not hunting for guilt, hunting for will, the kind of will you need when you're about to drag a heavy truth up a hill in front of your neighbors. Then she said the line that froze the air. "Is this the justice you have been serving?" No one coughed. No chairs scraped. Even Kane's defiance had the sense to be quiet for a second. I felt something shift in me, like a gear that had been grinding suddenly found its teeth. You could tell others felt it too. The collective awareness that the ground rules had changed and the handbook we were about to use was the one we should have been using all along. Naomi didn't hold the silence to savor it. She let it do its work, then broke it with purpose. "We proceed," she said. "By the book. Together, or we write your names down when you decide to stand in the way." In the back, the red recording light blinked its steady blink, counting us forward. Outside, the city moved as if nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. The air was already heavy when the smallest sound cracked it open. A chair scraped in the back row. Officer Lena Cho, barely more than a shadow against the wall, stood. Her hands shook so visibly it made the phone she held quiver like a leaf in the wind. Her voice was thin at first. "Chief." She faltered, swallowed hard, then forced the words out. "I've been recording. For 2 years." The room jolted. Heads snapped toward her. Even Kane, who had been trying to hold his posture together, blinked like he hadn't expected that confession. Lena's eyes darted toward the far corner, where Director Price from Internal Affairs usually prowled, though tonight he lingered in the shadows. Her voice cracked again, but she didn't stop. "I wanted to report it. Every beating, every payoff, every threat. But I couldn't. Price controlled everything. If I gave him proof, it would disappear, and so would I." The silence was electric, charged with shame and disbelief. Naomi rose slowly from her chair. She didn't stride, didn't tower. She just walked, measured, steady, until she stood in front of Lena. The young officer's eyes brimmed, her whole body trembling like a bird bracing for a storm. Naomi placed one firm, steady hand on her shoulder. From this moment on, she said, her voice low, but carrying through the hall, you are not alone. You walk with me. That one gesture cracked something far deeper than evidence ever could. A few officers blinked rapidly, trying to hide tears. Others shifted in their seats, guilt pooling heavy on their faces. For the first time in years, someone had broken the silence and been met with protection, not punishment. Then Naomi gave the order that made every head turn. Open Kane's locker. The metallic snap of the lock breaking sounded like a gunshot. The door groaned wide. Inside, buried beneath uniforms and deodorant sticks, was a worn leather journal. Naomi flipped it open, the spine crackling. She read aloud as her finger traced the lines. Chen's Grocery, $500. Martinez Produce, $300. Washington's Fish, $600. Each name, each amount scribbled in the same hand, page after page. And at the bottom of every page, 2 signatures in black ink, Kane and Price. Gasps rippled through the room. Some officers leaned forward, sickened curiosity pulling them in. Others recoiled as if the ink itself was poison. Naomi turned another page. Then her voice hardened enough to cut steel. Ward, $700. Threatened daughter if payment missed. The words didn't just land, they detonated. A young officer near the aisle shot to his feet. You threatened a child. His voice cracked, but it carried. Another officer muttered, Jesus Christ, before covering his mouth. All eyes swung to Kane. The man's face had drained, pale lips, twitching, denial forming, but dying before it found breath. It's a joke, he stammered. Notes, just notes. Out of context. But nobody bought it. Not anymore. The divide in the room was now visible, carved clean. A few officers crossed their arms, stone-faced, unwilling to meet Kane's eyes. Others looked sick, ashamed of their silence. And then there were the younger ones, the ones like Lena, whose expressions hardened into something new: disgust. Resolve. The spell Kane and Price had spun for years was unraveling strand by strand right there in front of everyone. Naomi closed the journal with a quiet thud. These are not notes. They are confessions. She let her gaze sweep the room, resting long enough on each man and woman to remind them that silence was no longer a shield. This is what some of you laughed along with. This is what some of you ignored. No one dared speak. Even Kane's supporters shifted uneasily in their seats, as though proximity alone could taint them. Lena clutched her phone tighter, drawing strength from Naomi's hand still on her shoulder. Her eyes, once downcast, lifted. For the first time since she joined the department, she wasn't hiding. Naomi looked directly at her. You were brave to record, but true courage is speaking when your voice shakes. Lena nodded through tears. Then I won't stop. That declaration wasn't loud, but it was enough. Enough to push the first domino. Officers who had been sitting stiff began leaning forward, eyes narrowing at Kane with disgust, not deference. A couple even shuffled their chairs back, as if the man they once followed now reeked of rot. The journal sat on the desk, open like a wound. And in that wound was the truth, names, numbers, threats, signatures. Proof that the corruption wasn't rumor, wasn't whispers in the locker room. It was inked, shared, signed. The division was real now. Lines had been drawn in that briefing hall. Some still clung to silence, hoping it would shield them. But more and more were peeling away from Kane, their faces etched with the dawning realization this wasn't about loyalty anymore. This was about survival, about conscience. The spell of fear was breaking, and Kane for the first time looked like he knew it. The journal still lay open on the desk when Eli Vance cleared his throat. He'd been quiet in the corner, hunched over his laptop, eyes reflecting the glow of multiple feeds. Now his voice was tight, urgent. Chief, this new camera in the lobby, it's not just video, it's got a microphone. Every head turned. For a beat, nobody moved. Naomi's eyes narrowed. Audio, Eli nodded. Installed last month. It records everything within 20 feet. Every word. The silence cracked like glass. Naomi's voice cut through. Play it! Eli's fingers flew. The speakers hissed, then steadied. A voice filled the room, deep, slick, dripping with arrogance. Price, the new chief's a black woman. That's easy. Diversity hire. She'll fold quick. Gasps rippled across the hall. Price's tone was smug, practiced, the kind of voice that assumed the walls were on his side. Then came Kane's laugh, ugly, sharp, the sound of a man unafraid of consequences. She's nothing. Just a quota. She'll collapse in a week. The room stiffened. Officers shifted in their seats, some exchanging glances, others staring down at their own hands. You could feel their shame thickening the air. Eli clicked again. Another recording. This time Kane's voice was low, menacing. Your payments are short. You think I don't notice I know where your daughter goes to school? The words dripped venom, casual and cruel. The room reacted like it had been stabbed. One officer muttered, "God Almighty," while another covered his mouth in disbelief. A veteran sergeant, his hair gray at the temples, pulled his badge from his chest with shaking fingers. He stared at it for a long second, then let it fall to the floor with a metallic clatter. The sound echoed like a confession no one had asked for. More audio rolled. Officers heard Kane laugh, with Price about shoving Mrs. Chen. Heard him spit insults at Mr. Martinez. Each clip drove nails into the coffin of their denial. But then a new voice entered, one none of us expected. Smooth, commanding, dripping with authority. Councilman Victor Hale. Raise the fees. Keep the market in fear. That's how we control them. The room erupted. Even the officers who had stayed silent couldn't keep their shock contained. Hale wasn't just some name scribbled in a ledger, he was City Hall power itself. Naomi's eyes sharpened. She didn't shout. She didn't let rage consume her. She just repeated the name under her breath as if carving it into stone. Councilman Hale. The seed was planted. We all felt it, the promise that this wasn't over. That the rot reached beyond Kane, beyond Price, and Naomi had just fixed her gaze on the next target. The audio kept playing, each file another piece of rot laid bare. Price's sneering dismissal. Kane's bragging cruelty. Hale's cold directives. Every word captured by a camera they'd installed themselves, blind to the trap it had become. And in that briefing hall, something shifted. The shame that had suffocated the younger officers was giving way to anger. Raw, focused anger. Faces hardened. Eyes cut toward Kane. And Price not with fear anymore, but disgust. One officer whispered, "This isn't policing. This is a racket." Another louder, "They used us." Kane tried to stand, but his knees betrayed him. He slumped back into the chair, sweat beading at his temple. Price's name crackled from the speakers again, mocking, arrogant, and every second it played, the man himself seemed to shrink. Naomi let the recording run until the room had no oxygen left for denial. Then she spoke low and steady. "This is not law. This is theft. This is fear. This is betrayal of everything a badge should stand for." The microphone caught every syllable, her voice now etched alongside theirs. The same system that had damned Kane, Price, and Hale was now preserving her words like a vow. The badge still lay on the floor where the veteran had dropped it. No one picked it up. It glimmered under the fluorescent light, a symbol stripped bare. Naomi's eyes didn't leave the room. "Remember this sound," she said, nodding toward the speakers. "This is what corruption sounds like. This is how it laughs, how it threatens children, how it poisons a city." The officers sat frozen, their faces pale, their consciences dragged into the light. "And remember this name," Naomi added, her tone sharpening. "Councilman Victor Hale. Because I will." It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. It was a promise, and everyone in that hall knew promises like hers did not fade. They gathered every officer in the hall that night. Rows of uniforms filled the benches, the air charged and heavy like a storm pressing down on the walls. Naomi stood at the front, calm but unyielding, the projector casting a pale glow across her face. Behind her, the screen flickered to life. First Mrs. Chen. The old woman bent over her crate of oranges, her weathered hands scrabbling for fruit that had rolled across the lobby floor. Her body so small, dwarfed by Kane's shove. The room shifted. Some officers lowered their eyes. Then Mr. Martinez appeared as Kane, slipping as Kane's finger jabbed inches from his face. He looked tired, not just from age, but from years of being worn down. Finally, the boy Ward's son, pinned against the wall, his backpack hanging loose, tears streaking his face. He was barely 16, his voice cracking as he begged. The image froze there, his eyes wide with terror. The silence in the hall was absolute. Naomi's voice rose low but steady, like someone chiseling words into stone. "These are not criminals. These are your neighbors, your vendors, your community. And this," she gestured to the screen, "is what Kane and Price did to them. Her tone sharpened each syllable like a nail driven into a coffin. Assault, extortion, racketeering, conspiracy, threatening a child. She looked at Kane, and Price slumped and cornered, then back to the room. These are not mistakes. These are crimes. The weight of her words pressed down until it felt hard to breathe. But then a voice cracked the silence. Sergeant Walter Briggs, broad-shouldered and gray-haired, stood up in the third row. 4 older officers rose with him. His voice shook, not from fear, but from anger. You sit up there, Chief, and you talk about crimes. You don't know what it's like to watch your wife's medicine go unpaid, to see your son drowning in bills you can't cover. He jabbed a finger toward the screen. That money, the envelopes, the overtime that kept my family alive. You want me to choose between my oath and my children's lives? Murmurs swelled like a tide. Some nodded sympathy etched in their faces. Others stiffened hands curling into fists. The room split, a jagged crack running straight through the heart of it. Naomi didn't flinch. Her gaze pinned Briggs where he stood. And what about their children? She pointed at the frozen image of young Ward pressed against the wall. Who paid his bills when Kane threatened his father? Who kept Mrs. Chen's family afloat when she was robbed of her dignity in this very building? The sergeant's face flushed red. His fist balled his chest, heaving. Don't you dare stand there and tell me I don't love my family. You love them, Naomi said, her voice soft but cutting. But in feeding your children, you starve someone else's. The words hit like a slap. Briggs's jaw clenched and the 4 men at his side bristled. The tension grew unbearable. I could see hands drift toward holsters, leather straps snapping loose. The hall went brittle, ready to shatter. Stand down, someone barked, but the command rang hollow. A young female officer suddenly broke. Her voice cracked as she pushed to her feet, tears spilling. We swore to protect the people, not bleed them dry. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her chest. I joined this department because I believed in it. I believed in us. And you're telling me stealing from the weak is the only way to feed our families? Then what are we? The words cut through the hall like lightning. Officers shifted, shame crawling across their faces. Some pulled their hands back from their guns, uncertain now, trembling with the weight of what they'd become. Briggs roared, your children, that's what you are. You think this city pays enough to keep a roof over your head. You think they care if your kid dies in a hospital bed. They don't. So we took what we had to take. The young officer's sobs shook the silence after his words. She wiped her cheeks with the back of her hand and whispered, then you stopped being a cop the moment you started taking. The hall fractured. One side murmured agreement, voices hardening with resolve. The other side bristled, muttering about betrayal, about survival. The space between the rows felt like a fault line about to erupt. Naomi let the storm churn. She didn't shout over it. She waited, standing steady until the noise burned itself into ragged breaths. Then she spoke, voice steady as steel. You say this was for your families, but every dollar you took, every threat you made, every silence you kept, those were choices, and choices have consequences. Her eyes swept the room, catching every officer in her net. If you truly want to protect your families, then stop hiding behind them. Stand with the people you swore to serve, because tonight you'll have to choose which side of the line you live on. The air was razor thin. Every chest rose and fell too quickly. Every eye flicked between neighbors, allies, strangers in the same uniform. And on the screen behind Naomi, the faces remained Mrs. Chen, Mr. Martinez, young Ward, watching, silently accusing without a word, daring every officer in that room to look away. The room was taut as wire when Naomi stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Every syllable dropped sharp and cold. Sergeant Briggs, she said, locking eyes with him. You have 10 seconds. Justice or complicity. Choose. The words landed like a gavel. A murmur ran through the hall. Hands tightened on belts. Faces went pale. The screen behind Naomi still showed Ward's boy, frozen in terror, his tears like silent testimony. Briggs's jaw worked furiously. His hand hovered near his holster, his chest rising and falling like a man running out of air. The 4 officers at his side, stiffened eyes darting between him and Naomi, between the weight of loyalty and the weight of truth. Naomi's gaze never wavered. 10. The silence was suffocating. 9. A shuffle broke it. Officer Bryant, tall and tired-eyed, stepped back from Briggs's shoulder. His voice cracked but carried. My wife? She wouldn't want blood money keeping her alive. She told me once better to die poor than live dirty. His badge gleamed under the lights as he moved to Naomi's side. 8. The line fractured. Two more men shifted their boots, scuffing the floor. They looked at each other once, then peeled away from Briggs. One whispered, I've got kids too, but I can't show them this. Their retreat left Briggs exposed, his flank crumbling like sand underwater. 7. The hall trembled with breath, with fear, with shame. Naomi's voice cut clean. 6. By now the divide was visible, one side swelling behind her shoulders, straightening with every number. The other shrinking, losing mass, losing certainty. 5. Briggs's face was red veins standing out at his temple. His lone ally gripped his gun so tightly the knuckles blanched, but his eyes were wide, uncertain. The room seemed to lean forward, suspended on a string. 4. No one else moved. The tension was unbearable. Naomi's voice didn't rise, but the steel in it deepened. 3. Briggs licked his lips, sweat rolling down his cheek. You don't understand. I understand perfectly. Naomi's reply sliced through. 2. Something broke then. The last ally wavered, looked at Briggs with hollow eyes, and stepped away. He lowered his hand from his gun and crossed to Naomi's side. The hall swallowed the sound of his boots as though the building itself was listening. Briggs was alone. 1. Naomi stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the countdown itself. Nearly 40 officers stood behind her, now their numbers a wall of resolve. Briggs, stripped of support, looked like a man teetering at the edge of a cliff. His hands shook on his weapon. His shoulders trembled. His eyes darted across the room at Kane, slumped in shame, at Price, sweating in the corner, at the faces of the men and women he'd once commanded. No one moved to stand with him. Finally, Briggs exhaled a sound halfway between a growl and a sob. His hand dropped. The gun hung useless at his side. His knees softened, and for the first time the sergeant looked small. Naomi didn't gloat. She stepped closer, her presence steady as a verdict. Sergeant Briggs, she said, her tone as cold as iron, you are under arrest. She motioned and cuffs clicked around his wrists. The sound was final, undeniable. Briggs bowed his head, his breath coming in ragged pulls, the fight leaking out of him like air from a punctured tire. Naomi turned back to the hall. Her eyes swept the rows, her voice carrying, not like thunder, but like truth itself. The badge is not a privilege, she said. It is a debt owed to the people, and debts must be paid. The words sank deep, carving themselves into the silence. Officers shifted, some blinking back tears, others standing taller than they had in years. On the floor, Briggs's badge gleamed beside his fallen weapon, abandoned and stripped of meaning. Behind Naomi, the image of Ward's boy still hung on the screen, watching with eyes that seemed to pierce every soul in that room. And in that moment, no one could deny it, the countdown wasn't just for Briggs. It was for all of them. The hall was still humming with the echo of Briggs's arrest when Price made his move. He stood slowly, smoothing his tie like the chaos around him didn't matter. His eyes glittered with the kind of confidence only a man who's lived too long in shadows could wear. You all think she's some savior? He sneered, tapping on his tablet. Then watch this. The projector flickered. A grainy clip filled the screen. Naomi in uniform, her arm slamming a man against a wall. Her fist raised, her voice lost in static. The image was ugly, brutal. Gasps broke through the hall like cracks in ice. A few officers muttered under their breath. Someone whispered, "She's no different than Kane." The doubt spread fast, rolling across the room like smoke. Men who had just crossed over to Naomi's side shifted uneasily, their eyes flicking between the screen and her. It was a clever strike, cheap but clever. Naomi didn't flinch. She didn't rush forward, didn't try to shout over the footage. She stood still, hands loose at her sides, her expression calm, almost serene. The red mark from Kane's slap still lingered faintly on her cheek, but her eyes were steady, as if daring the lie to burn itself out. The clip ended, the room buzzing with unease. Price smiled, spreading his arms. There, your great champion, another thug in a badge. How long before she turns on you the same way? For a heartbeat, it looked like the tide might turn. But then Eli Vance moved. He shoved back his chair cords, tangling around his ankle, and strode up with his laptop clutched tight. His voice was sharp with outrage. Play it again. Price's smile faltered. Eli didn't wait. He tapped his keys, dragging metadata into the open. The screen split on one side, the damning clip. On the other file, details and timestamps. Eli pointed with a trembling finger. This isn't an arrest. It's a training simulation from Fort Bragg 6 years ago. The voice track has been spliced. Look, 2 different audio layers stitched over original footage. Cheap work price. Sloppy. Murmurs rose again, but this time in a different tone. Skepticism shifting back toward fury. Heads turned toward Price, suspicion sharpening like blades. And then Lena stood. Her small frame trembled, but her voice carried clear. She held up a creased paper, edges worn from being folded too many times. This is from the Department of Defense. Chief Carter was awarded this commendation after pulling 3 civilians out of crossfire during that exact mission. I've read the report myself. She saved lives while men twice her rank froze. The silence broke in applause, not polite, but raw, desperate, affirming. Dozens of hands clapped, some pounding against benches, some officers even letting out rough, relieved cheers. The doubt that Price had tried to stoke collapsed in on itself, smothered by proof and loyalty. Naomi finally spoke, her voice calm and cutting. She turned her gaze on Price. You built a clip, Price. You thought pixels could bury truth. But you forgot one thing: lies can be edited, but the truth always leaves a trace. And traces don't lie. Her words hit like scripture, simple and undeniable. Officers nodded, some muttering agreement under their breath. One veteran near the back murmured, "That's the chief I follow." Price's smirk had curdled. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. The weight of the room had shifted again, and this time it wasn't coming back. Naomi didn't press her victory. She didn't need to. She let the evidence and the loyalty she had earned do the work. Then she turned back to the hall, her voice quiet but resolute. Every lie you hear tonight, test it. Don't take it at face value. Test it. Because truth is not fragile. It survives the fire. And in that moment, the smear had failed, not because the lie was weak, but because the truth stood taller. The hall had just settled into a fragile calm when the side doors opened. Councilman Victor Hale stepped in, his polished shoes clicking against the tile. His smile practiced, his suit immaculate. He moved like a man who believed every eye in the room already belonged to him. Chief Carter, Hale said smoothly, raising his hands in mock surrender. I came as soon as I heard the commotion. The city thanks you for handling matters so decisively. His words dripped with honey, but behind the sweetness there was rot. He shook a few hands as he walked down the aisle, pausing to nod at men who now avoided his gaze. Of course, I'll do everything I can to help your investigation. He added, his voice warm, but too warm, like a man trying to smother fire with oil. Naomi didn't answer. She simply watched, silent, letting him speak himself into a corner. The officers in the hall shifted uneasily. After all they had just seen, they no longer trusted smooth words. Hale cleared his throat. We must make sure the procurement tag issue doesn't resurface, or, well, you know how messy that can get. The word hit the room like a crack of thunder. Procurement tag. It wasn't public language. It was an internal phrase used only in the backroom deals, the coded label for slush funds hidden in city contracts. Naomi's eyes sharpened. Interesting choice of words, Councilman. She took one slow step forward. Tell me, how would a man outside this building know about procurement tags? The smile faltered. Hale blinked, once his jaw tightening. I read reports. No, Naomi cut him off, her voice slicing through the hall. Reports don't use that phrase. Only those who signed off on those deals would know it. You just confessed without realizing it. You're not an ally, you're an accomplice. The hall erupted. Shouts thundered from the benches. He's in it, cuff him, he sold us out. Officers who had sat in silence now surged to their feet, their fury spilling over. Hale backed a step, his polished calm slipping like cheap paint under rain. From the corner, Price snapped. His mask of control shattered. You fools, he roared. Cutting off the head won't kill the body. You think jailing Hale ends this? The system runs deeper than one man. His words, meant to intimidate, only damned him further. Gasps ran through the room, then an angry wave of voices rose. He admitted it. He's part of it too. Naomi let the chaos crest before she raised her hand. Her voice, calm and steady, sliced clean through the storm. You're right, Price. The rot is deeper than one man. But we're not here to kill a snake. We're here to change the forest it slithers in. Her words landed like a hammer striking an anvil. Officers stood straighter. Even those who had been uncertain moments before now felt the shift in the room, felt something larger than themselves take root. Naomi gave a single nod. Two officers moved forward without hesitation. The clink of handcuffs snapped tight around Hale's wrists. His polished hands, once free to sign contracts in shadow, now hung chained before him. Price lunged in protest, but three officers pinned him to the wall, his curses muffled under the weight of iron clicking shut. The sound of his defiance broke against the room like waves against rocks, swallowed in the noise of boots stamping and voices rising. For the first time, Kane, Briggs, Price, and Hale, all symbols of arrogance, corruption, and unchecked power, stood shackled in the very hall they once ruled. Naomi turned her eyes, sweeping the assembly. This is what happens when lies meet light. This is what happens when silence is broken. The hall quieted, not from fear, but from something heavier, conviction. The air was thick with the knowledge that what had just unfolded wasn't the end. It was the beginning. And for the first time that night, the building no longer felt like a prison of secrets. It felt like a battlefield reclaimed. The hall was quiet again, but this time it was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something new being born. Naomi stood at the center, her presence, steady, her voice carrying not just to the officers before her, but in a way to the city beyond those walls. Tonight, she began, we stop pretending justice is a word on paper. Tonight it becomes practice. She outlined the reforms with clarity, her tone measured, deliberate. Every body cam will upload footage automatically to a secure public server. No clip can be erased, no excuse accepted. Overtime hours must be logged with video evidence of work performed. An independent civilian board will oversee complaints with full access to evidence. And every month, this department will hold open community meetings where citizens can look us in the eye and speak their truth. The words sank into the crowd. For some, it felt like shackles. For others, like oxygen. But no one could deny the shift. Accountability was no longer a theory. It was law. Naomi wasn't done. She turned her gaze, sweeping the room, and spoke with quiet steel. And those who broke faith will not hide behind walls. Every officer involved will face those they harmed. Not in shadows, not in secret. Here. The doors opened and the victims stepped forward. Mrs. Chen, her hands trembling, clutching her scarf. Mr. Martinez leaning heavily on his cane. And young Ward's shoulders hunched but eyes burning with defiance. The officers who had laughed at their suffering now faced them, badges, gleaming like mirrors that only reflected shame. One by one, they lowered their heads, murmuring apologies that cracked in their throats. Mrs. Chen broke first. Tears spilled down her face as she reached for Naomi's hand. "Thank you," she whispered in broken English, her voice raw. Then she embraced her, sobbing into Naomi's shoulder. Mr. Martinez straightened with effort, his hands shaking as he extended it. Naomi clasped it firmly, steadying him. His voice quavered but held. "For years I thought no one would listen. Tonight I know I was wrong." Even Ward, so young and already scarred, nodded once at Naomi. He said nothing, but the way he stood taller, straighter, spoke louder than words. Then came the moment that no one expected. Naomi turned to Lena Cho, the young officer who had once trembled in fear, and called her forward. In Naomi's hand gleamed a silver badge engraved with authority. "Lena," Naomi said softly, "when you were told to delete, you chose to record. When you were told to be silent, you chose to speak. That is what leadership looks like. From this day forward, you serve as assistant director." The hall erupted. Applause thundered, not polite, but fierce, a roar of approval that rattled the walls. The younger officers especially clapped until their palms reddened their cheers, breaking into something close to tears. Lena's hands shook as Naomi pinned the badge to her chest. For the first time that night, the weight on her shoulders seemed lighter. She mouthed a single word, "Thank you." Naomi stepped back to the place where it had all begun, the very spot where Kane's hand had cracked across her face. She lifted her own badge, glinting in the harsh fluorescent light, and pinned it back to her vest. Her voice rose firm and final. "A badge is not power, it is not privilege, it is responsibility. And responsibility is heavier than any weapon you'll ever carry." The hall stood almost as one. Some officers had tears in their eyes. Others clenched their fists, not in anger, but in resolve. The room was no longer divided. It was reforged. But just as the applause swelled again, Eli stepped forward holding a folder recovered from Hale's briefcase. "Chief," he said cautiously, "there's something else." Naomi took the papers, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the pages. Among the contracts and bank records was a sealed envelope. On its cover, a strange symbol was drawn, a circle crossed with 3 slashes, marked only with the letters SC. Her face didn't change, but the silence returned. She closed the folder and set it on the table. "Tonight we cut away rot. But this," she said, her voice grave, "tells me the roots run deeper than we thought. There's someone else, someone bigger, and they're still out there." The officers exchanged uneasy glances. For all the triumph of the night, the truth was clear: the fight wasn't over. Naomi looked back at her people, at Mrs. Chen, at Lena, at every soul in that hall who had chosen the harder road. And with quiet certainty, she said, "Then we keep going. Because justice doesn't stop here. This is just the dawn." The applause that followed wasn't wild. It was steady, strong, unbroken. The kind of sound that didn't fade, it carried like a promise. And in that hall, under the weight of a new beginning, everyone knew the story wasn't ending. It was only turning a page. What we've just witnessed is more than a story. It's a reminder that courage and truth can turn even the darkest moments into a new beginning. Naomi's fight wasn't only about cleaning a department. It was about proving that justice is a responsibility we all share. If this story moved you, please give it a like, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and don't forget to subscribe to Mr. Max Stories for more powerful tales like this one. Your support means more than numbers. It gives our team the strength to keep creating stories that shine a light on justice, dignity, and hope. Remember this at Mr. Max Stories: every story is not just told, it's carried in the heart.